So I'm in .loop. You guys are all familiar with .loop and adding files, sort of a little bit. You guys know how to do that. So all I've done here is what you would do is when you're writing an offer, start a new loop. I use the address. That's the easiest way to identify your loops, is to use a property address as the loop name. And then once you're in there, then you'll add the documents that you need. There's a way to do it with templates. Don't ask me how, because I don't know how to pull the templates in. I always just add the documents that I know I need in there. So these are the documents that I add to a purchase agreement. So when I'm writing an offer, so the first thing we need, you want the purchase checklist. So that's so you can make sure that it's going to have everything on there that is required. It's going to tell you if it's required or optional. If it's optional, when do you need it? Like a lead-based paint wouldn't always be in there, but if it's prior to 78, then it would be required. So it'll tell you all that. Your consumer guide to agency relationship, you should have this signed already before you're writing the offer. Those consumer guides are supposed to be signed when you have your first contact with your client. That's important because it explains to them agency. And especially now that we've changed that we allow dual agency, that's really important that they understand what dual agency is. The agency disclosure statement always needs to be in there. This is the order that I like to see it when I open up my loops too. For me, it's just easier that way. But if you guys have a different order, as long as it's all there. So I like to have the agency disclosure statement followed by the purchase agreement, followed by the ABA if we're using Ohio Real Title, or if you guys have your own affiliate, then you'll add your own ABA in there. The removal of contingencies for your, actually, this is not the right order because I would do that there. For your protection, get a home inspection. This is a required document. It's an FHA document, and I've decided to make it required for all of our contracts, even if it's not an FHA buyer. The reason being, so we added that as a required document about 2 years ago, or a year ago maybe, when buyers were all passing on inspections to be more competitive in that market. And I wanted them to understand, I wanted the buyers to make sure that they understood the importance of a home inspection, and that it's not our recommendation to skip a home inspection. So even though it's not quite as common anymore to skip home inspections, it's still important that we have that in there. That is a required document, even though it's an FHA form. We've required it on all of our purchase agreements. And we have the removal of contingency, and then the APHW, the America's Preferred Home Warranty Order form. So I'm gonna open these up and we can start going through them. All right, so the first form is the checklist, right? So it's pretty self-explanatory. It's telling you that you need the MLS printout, you need the consumer guide. You need, I don't know why it says if you're representing a buyer, if you're representing, oh, I guess because if you're representing the seller, you're already going to have one in your listing loop. So consumer guide to agency, the MLS printout is going to go through all the required documents. If needed, the FHA financing addendum, VA financing addendum, condo addendums. These are things that wouldn't necessarily be on every single transaction of ours, but if we're doing a condo, we need to have the condo addendum. If your buyer is getting FHA or VA financing, we need that addendum.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you still need the COVID? Go up the COVID addendum. Are you still requiring it?
It's not, no, I'm not really requiring it anymore. I think it's a good idea to have it in there. So with the COVID addendum, and I don't have it in, we can go over that too. in this class, but it's probably still a good idea to have it, but I wouldn't say, I don't think it needs to be required. I can get that updated. It doesn't need to be required anymore. It's good to have it because it does say that if I'm your buyer and I'm supposed to sign today, but I'm sick with COVID and I cannot meet the notary, that it automatically extends that contract to allow for that quarantine period. It's 5 days now or whatever it is. It automatically extends the contract. So if your client has COVID and can't sign, if there's hopefully it never happens again, but if the government office is shut down and title can't file it, if something along those lines happen, it protects our clients that we're not breaching a contract by not signing because we're stuck in quarantine. So it's not required, but it's probably a smart thing just to throw in there anyways. So consumer guide to agency relationship, this just updated. So you guys all got a copy of it when we updated it a couple weeks ago, a month ago. So this is supposed to be signed by our client the first time we have any significant conversations with them. So the exception is open houses, that we're not required to present it, and we don't have to have a stack of them at an open house. But anytime we meet a potential client or customer, we need to give them a copy of this. It's for their protection, that they understand agency, and it explains here, if I'm representing a seller, here's my duties to the seller. If I'm representing a buyer, here's my duties to you as a buyer. They need to know this before they talk about anything confidential with you. You don't want them to start spilling, not understand agency relationships, start spilling all their confidential information to you, to find out later that you have no duty of confidentiality with them, and you're going right back to your seller and telling them everything that this buyer just told you. So that's why it's really important the first time. So if it's a sign call on your listing and you're meeting a buyer, bring that to that sign call, or better yet, send it to them before your meeting, have them e-sign it before the meeting, but at the very least, hand it to them before you walk them through the door so that they understand agency. And then of course, now we do allow dual agency. And so that explains if you're representing both parties, what your obligations are to each client. And in a nutshell, it's, you need to treat everybody fairly, honestly, and fairly, but you cannot negotiate in favor of one client over the other. So that's the consumer guide. Now we get into the agency disclosure statement. So this is top section is fairly straightforward. You put the property address that you're writing your offer for, your buyer's name, and then the seller's name. So look up the seller. If you're not representing them, you can look them up on Realist or find on the disclosures, wherever you need to find it, put in their name here. Then we need to pick one of three sections. If this is section 1 is what I think we use most commonly. Section 1 is 2 agents from different brokerages. So if the listing agent is from anywhere other than Keller Williams Living, that means if they're another Keller Williams brokerage, because we're independently owned and operated. So if it's another KW office, we still use section 1 because we're 2 separate brokerages, right? Section 2 would be if you have a buyer on my listing, the 2 agents are in the same brokerage. I'm sorry, take a step back. So just fill in the blanks. Buyers represented by Danny Nichols and Keller Williams Living. Sellers represented by John Doe at Remax Traditions, let's just say. Section 2 would be the listing agents at Keller Williams Living, and you're representing the buyer, they're representing the seller. We're each representing our own client. We would never use this bottom paragraph here. we're not, we each are going to represent our own client. That second part of section 2 would be if everybody's representing everybody, right? So we're not going to do that. So we're going to check that box up here in section 2, and we're going to say Keller Williams. First box is 2 agents both at Keller Williams Living. Down here that we check that box, and agent Barbara Wolf works with the buyer and Danny Nichols works with the seller. And so we know that each of you represent your own client. Okay. Section 3 would be if it's an unrepresented seller. So you're writing an offer for a buyer. That seller is a for sale by owner. They don't have representation, or if you're a dual agent. So if it's your listing that you're writing the offer and you're acting as a dual agent, we're going to use section 3. Basically, there's only one real estate agent involved in the transaction. That's when we use section 3. You would write your name here, Keller Williams Living, in that second box. If you're acting as a dual agent, you're going to check this box. There we go. If you're not, if it's a for sale by owner, you can always check this bottom box. There we go. And then in this case, because we're talking about representing buyers, we're going to check the buyer box. So that's a for sale by owner. It's an unrepresented seller. Just remember, if you're working with an unrepresented seller, this has not changed from before dual agency. This is the same. First thing is you need to present them with an unrepresented seller contract. First of all, that's going to explain to the seller your fiduciary duties to the buyer. Number 2 is it also protects you for your commissions. You're going to write in there that you're expecting to get paid if your buyer purchases this home. This is what your commission is going to be. So you can fill in that. So that's the purpose of that. And then the second thing that you would need at that point is also consumer guide. When I've sold for sale by owners, what I do is I call them up on the phone. I have a buyer. Can I show it? They say, sure. Great. Before I come to the house, I need you guys to sign a couple documents just explaining my fiduciary duties to my client, and email it to them in .loop, and they may sign it, and without question they may call you back with questions. But it's important that before you walk through the door that they understand that you don't represent them if they're an unrepresented seller. Questions about this form?
I have a question about that one space under dual agency. I was reading it.
Yeah.
That's just if you're related to one of the buyer or seller, correct?
Dual agency is further explained. Is that what you're reading?
Yeah, such relationship does exist. Explain.
Yeah. So
Buyer is my brother.
well, that could be a personal relationship or a business relationship. So if the buyer's your tenant, there's a business relationship too, not just a personal family relationship.
So if I say I have a listing and then a buyer comes, and
I would encourage you not to act as a dual agent when you have a relationship with, if your mom is buying a house that you have listed, I think you don't want to be a dual agent. That's just opening up a whole can of worms. And I think at that point you either step out of the transaction entirely, or you refer seller, because you can't refer your mom because you're always gonna I mean you can either completely step out of the transaction and let somebody else represent the buyer and somebody else represent the seller entirely, and you just take a step out of the transaction altogether, collect a referral fee if that's what you want, or you represent the person that you have that relationship with. So if that's, again, if your mom is the buyer, I would say tell the seller you can't represent them in this situation and refer the seller to somebody else at that
is
point.
a business relationship a past client?
No,
No?
No, a business relationship would be like, it's oh, you're saying like I sold them the house, now they're,
Say it's a past client, they're wanting to move and they saw a listing of mine and they're like, hey, Kathleen, I saw your new listing.
no, you'd be acting as a dual agent. I mean, I guess like everything else, like I always say, is when in doubt, disclose. So I think you can just disclose that.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt to over disclose. It could potentially hurt to under disclose. So,
Are you saying you're a repeat buyer?
There's tons of repeat buyers. That's most of my.
yeah,
business.
I don't think that's what that's referring to. I think that a business relationship would be, that, I think the best example that's popping in my head at the moment would be, it's your tenant,
Got it.
you own this house, your tenant, the tenant is there paying you, you have a business relationship with them. The tenant says, hey, Kathleen, I want to go buy a house. Now you're going to show them houses. That's, you have that business relationship there. That's the best example I can think of at the moment off the top of my head on the spot. But I think in that case, you should disclose that there's also a relationship, not necessarily a family relationship, but there's some sort of
Okay.
business relationship between you guys. Page 2, just there's nothing to sign here for your clients, nothing for you to fill out. It's just explaining to your client what dual agency is. So if you become a dual agent, then you want to point this page out to them so that they can understand that what the duties are. Actually, I would say not only if you're a dual agent, but if we're using, scrolling back up here, section 2, 2 agents from the same brokerage, you may not be the dual agent, but the brokerage is. I, as your broker, am a dual agent in that scenario. So if Barbara is listing Danny's buyer and you guys are not dual agents, but if there's a conflict that the broker needs to be brought into, I'm a dual agent at that point. So this page would be important anytime there's a dual agent, whether it's you or the brokerage. All right. And now we get into the fun stuff. This part always takes a little bit longer to go through, and when you're going through it with your clients, it takes a little bit longer too. So I'll just tell you what goes in the blanks, and I'll fill some of them in as we go along too, but stop me anytime there's questions about what anything means in here. So the first thing, obviously, we put in our buyer's name. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer hereby offer to buy 123 Main Street, Solon, Ohio, and then put in your parcel number there, right? It's important, don't skip the parcel number, look it up and stick it in there. It's important. I always tell my clients as we're going through this that you're buying the property as is, and buyers always stop me there and say, wait, what do you mean I'm buying it as is? I want inspections. And I always tell them, we're going to get to the inspection section coming up. So, but you do have the right to know what is as is, but you're buying it as is. And we get deeper into that in the following pages here. But it includes including any defects, which is why inspections are important. The land, any rights to the land, if there's any easements, if anybody has mineral rights, those are not necessarily transferred to your buyer. If somebody has the gas lease on the property, they're not getting the gas rights on that gas well. It also is important that they know it includes all fixtures, and fixtures or anything that's attached to the house. That could be a light fixture, that could be a plumbing fixture like a toilet, that could be your carpet that's attached, not an area rug, because an area rug is not attached, right? So if it's fixed to the wall, it's a fixture, right?
It's you
Yeah, I mean, that's one that I think sometimes when there's disputes over fixtures, it's usually like the TV mount. I mean, I would think my stance would be a TV mount is a fixture. I also don't necessarily get my buyers excited about that TV mount has to convey with the property, because we'd also know that sometimes those get taken and you can replace them for 50, 60, but you know, it's not. But the thing that I worry about with TV mounts leaving is also the holes that they leave behind in the wall. So, you know, little nail hole where you took down your family photo is different than a big bolt that's holding up a 75-inch TV on the wall, right? So yeah, I mean, I would think that it's a fixture. I think that also my buyers don't always expect that those will stay, and if they do expect it, I would just write it into the contract under chattel on line 18. Chattel, just a fancy word for personal property. So the pool table, the TV mount, if they're expecting the TV mount to stay, I would usually just write it in there. Another thing that, I mean, that could be disputed of whether it's a fixture or not is mirrors, bathroom mirrors. If it's fixed to the wall, I think it's a fixture, but I know in my house, my bathroom mirrors are hung on a nail like a picture would be, right? And in fact, when I moved, I took that mirror with me because it was hanging on a hook. So I said, well, it's not fixed to the house, it's hanging. I took it, we got into a big dispute after closing about whether I was allowed to take that bathroom mirror. I still think that I was, the buyer's agent will still fight me on this. I also think because it was hanging on a hook, it was personal property, and I don't think I did anything inappropriate by taking it, but bathroom mirrors are one that sometimes get disputed. So yeah, so bathroom fixtures, landscaping is listed in here too. So if there's a special rose bush that grandma brought from the old country or whatever that you're planning on taking out of the ground, that's a fixture. That's included in the sale unless you exclude it on line 20. So, and that's one that I recently saw with one of our agents. And then we got to check what's included of the other things that aren't all in the house. So satellite dishes, nobody ever takes their satellite dishes, but if you want to, if there is one and you want to check the box, you can check it. If they take it, there's going to be holes in the roof, so you want them to leave it, even if they're even if you're not intending to hook up to that dish company, you probably still want to leave that dish there because you don't want the holes in the roof. The range and oven, the microwave, if any of these kitchen appliances are included in the sale, then you want to check these boxes. The dishwasher, washer, dryer. If there's fireplace, does it have glass doors on it? Is there a screen on that? Is there a grate? Are there gas logs? I always check all existing window treatments. Ceiling fans is listed separately, although that's a lighting fixture. I mean, it's attached to the house anyways. So you want to make sure you check all that off. Line 18, you would write in anything that's anything that is not listed above, anything that's personal property that is staying in the house. So if that buyer of mine wanted that bathroom mirror, they should have written it in on line 18. That's what I feel about it. Pool tables, you know, you want the pool table's going to stay with, write that in on line 18. And on line 20, if there's a fixture that needs to leave, that you do not want it, there's the old playground in the backyard that you want, your buyers want it gone. I've had old oil tanks, heating oil tanks in a basement that were abandoned, that my buyer didn't want to deal with removing that from the house later. We put that in there. That was a fixture that was abandoned, but it was still fixed to the house. So we put that in there to remove that fixture. So if there's anything that has to go, any fixtures that have to go, you put that in there. Questions till now?
Well, real quick, so
Yeah.
you said if like they want to take the mirror from that house, we put it on line 18 to 20.
If it's staying in the house, so line 18, chattel included in the
Okay.
purchase agreement would be any personal property that's, so like a pool table is a good example. That's not, a pool table would not be a fixture to the house, right? Those are personal property. Yeah, if you're negotiating patio furniture, the surround sound system in the living room. Kathleen, what's another example that you've seen? Just
Make sure there's something in the surround sound.
yeah,
I saw a high-end house with no surround sound, had it all over the house, marketed, everything. There was no guts in the surround sound.
I mean, I've seen like, yeah, a trampoline, if you're leaving it, if you're negotiating that trampoline is supposed to stay, then put that in on line 18. That's the chattel personal property that is staying with this purchase agreement. Just be aware, if you're doing that, the downside of that is if it's a financed purchase, the appraiser may have problems with it. So what I do when I do sell houses that include let's going back to the pool table example, if the appraiser comes through and says, yeah, your purchase is 200, but it includes a pool table that we think is worth $1,000, and now you're $1,000 short on your appraisal, that's going to be a problem. So what I've learned to do over the years is write in pool table on line 18, but then I add the words which has no value.
Okay.
So if it has no value, then it shouldn't. That's how I've gotten around that in the past, because if an appraiser sees that you've got thousands of dollars worth of extra stuff, an above ground pool, by the way, is another one that could really mess up
So
an
you would
appraisal.
just say above ground pool, but
Above ground pool and all the equipment which has no value, or at a value of $0, however you want to write it, but just bless you, so that the lender and the appraiser understand that you're not considering any money. Your purchase price isn't reflective of, the home's worth 190, but we've got an extra 10 grand of stuff, so we're going to offer 200 because we're also including the whatever. Let's just make sure that everybody understands that that's not part of the consideration of the purchase price, because it could mess up your appraisal when you get to that point.
Just let's go back to line 11. Water softener is the last one.
Mhm.
So if anybody sells a house with a water softener, the first question when you're selling it is find out if that water softener is owned or leased. Pasture had 2 lease. And you gotta prepare both the seller and the buyer if it's a lease. Because the seller has to tell the leasing company, I am stopping my lease. And the buyer has to figure out, do they want to continue the lease or they want a new system?
Yeah.
And it takes weeks to make that decision. You can't do it at the last minute
And
because they're gonna take all the guts out of there. If the seller, especially with well water, if it's a well water house, the seller cancels it because it's a lease. The buyer thinks they're getting it. So you gotta know what's staying, what's going on that one.
mhm. And Kathleen, you do more with well water. I mean, we see water softeners on city water occasionally, but not very often. But you do more with well water, so you probably know this. I would imagine also that if it's leased, depending on the terms of the lease, you may not be able to cancel the lease or to terminate that lease. That Culligan or whoever's doing that water softener may expect that it's going to be paid off. So if you're not taking that lease, then the seller needs to understand that could be an added expense to them to pay Culligan or whatever it costs to terminate that lease early. So, yeah. And if it's leased, by the way, it should be, I would still ask the question, but it should be in the property disclosures, there is that section that says security system and water softener and a couple other items that asks if it's owned or leased. So it should be there, but you still want to ask the question because sellers don't always think it through when they're filling out that form. Secondary offers on line 23. So if you, I think this was maybe more common when the market was crazy, and I'm not sure that it's quite as common now, that things are slowing down a little bit. But if you are writing a secondary offer, all that means is that seller's already accepted somebody else's offer. It's got contingencies, and you're going to write an offer. You're going to negotiate that offer now up front so that if that first deal falls apart because of financing, because of inspections, because of whatever it may be, that you will automatically become the primary. So they just have to notify you that it's already negotiated out, it's signed, and all that has to happen is that seller needs to terminate the contract with the first buyer, and it does not go back on the market. If you do that, just make sure you have a date here that you know, whatever your clients are comfortable with, but you don't want that secondary offer to be out there floating around forever and ever, right? So it should have a date here that
How would you typically say, like, would that date be if they were gonna?
I would think, you know, I can honestly say I've written offers. I've never had them accepted secondaries, but I would think that if you're going that route, most likely it's really only an inspection contingency that you're considering, right? So you would think that typical inspection contingency is 7-10 days, and then 3 more days to negotiate that out. So I would say don't give it longer than 2 weeks, unless you're talking about if you're hoping that the financing falls through, or if the listing agent says that, hey, the financing doesn't seem so strong, and maybe you want to, and your buyer's willing to sit around for 30 days. My guess is most buyers, if they're not going to have this house, they want to move on. They want to be free to go look at the next house too. So,
Another offer on, and if they did that.
yeah, well, because if that deal falls apart, they've got the contract. So yeah. Were you going to ask something, Danny?
No, I was
Oh, okay. Next section, the price, pretty self-explanatory. This is, you know, we're writing the offer for 180. We put in 180 here. Earnest money. It's up to you and your client, you know, on a, you know, using this 180 as our example, I would say $2,000, $3,000 is probably the appropriate amount. In the old days, we used to do $500 earnest money. I don't think that's very meaningful. It's easy for somebody to walk away from $500. We all understand the purpose of earnest money, right? And the value of it, to show a little skin in the game. So, you know, I wouldn't go less than $1,000, but I really not even sure 1,000 really means a whole lot to a seller. So, and then we have 3 options to collect that earnest money. Wire funds to the escrow agent. That's my preferred method. Check made payable to the escrow agent. If you do that, I don't love this because I don't want you guys holding on to checks, right? So they hand you that check for $3,000, even though it's made out to Ohio Real Title. Now you're responsible for that piece of paper in your hand. So I would not, I never do a check. And the third option would be a note. I would just do the wired funds. And by the way, most title companies will let you, instead of going to the bank and wiring and paying the fee for wiring, and having to make an appointment at the bank to wire, most title companies now on their websites, Ohio Real has it, where you can just go onto their website and deposit like an ACH. So I would, even though that's technically not a wire, I would still call that a wired funds.
So when it says check made payable to the escrow agent, I mean, we've had like buyer clients who like want to deliver a check to them, like they're gonna go hand a check to, like, not that we take it, would you?
Yeah, you just need to make sure that they do it. And you need to make sure that you get confirmation. Well, either way, no matter what the method of delivery is, you want to make sure that you get confirmation from that title company that they're in receipt of those earnest money funds. And this is probably a good spot to talk about what if your client doesn't deposit earnest money. So we can write it in the contract. We can tell our clients that you have to do it. If they don't do it, then what? So we need to protect ourselves. So leading up to it, so we have the contract says they have 4 days to make that deposit. You should be calling them. Hey, did you deposit? No, not yet. Okay, make sure that you get it deposited by Friday. Friday's our deadline. It needs to be in there by Friday. Tomorrow, have you done it? No. Or check with the title company and they don't have it. Just keep on checking in with your client, make sure they have it. It's due on Friday and Saturday comes and it's not there. It's our responsibility to call that listing agent and say, just so you're aware, we have not been able to collect the earnest money yet. I'm following up with the buyer to make sure that he does it, that they deposit that money. You need to follow up with your client on a regular basis. I suggest an email so that it's documented. Emails are better than text messages, although text message, at least it's something in writing, but email is going to be better and safer for us. And you need to constantly communicate with that listing agent that it hasn't been deposited today. Oh, it's Saturday now. They're going to go on Monday. The banks aren't going to wire it Saturday, Sunday. We're going to send it on Monday. Monday, follow up with the buyer, follow up with the listing agent. They need to be, if you're not communicating with that listing agent that your buyer has not met one of their obligations in the contract, you're just as wrong as they are. We can't, you're not going to be responsible to send that wire on their behalf, but you need to make sure that you're communicating with both your client and with that other agent so that everybody knows the disposition of that earnest money. All right. So we said we're gonna wire $3,000. So the cash down payment, this, even though it's got a dollar sign there, what I typically do for myself, you can calculate the dollars. What I typically do is 20% or 3.5% or 5%, whatever their down payment is. I would write it there as a percentage. That way, if you're going back and forth negotiating the price, you're only changing one line and not every single line every time. You might say 10% or more. If they might be putting more than 10%, and you want them to have that option, you can put 10% or more. And then under mortgage amount, you can write the balance. And then if they're taking that mortgage, then check off what type of financing they're getting. And if they're cash, obviously, then, oops, what they do. Yeah, here we go. And then obviously if they're cash, you're not writing 10% or more, you're going to put the entire balance up here. And then 0 for the mortgage. Questions up till now? Keep on going. That first paragraph on line 46 to 48, that just talks about Ohio's law requiring $10,000 or more to be wired. So you can't accept, if they want to go drop that check off, if your earnest money is $10,000, they can't drop off that check. It has to be a wire. Okay. Same thing goes for closing funds. Electronic data security. This is a really important paragraph to explain to our clients. This basically says, hey, there's a lot of wire fraud going on out there. I'm never going to send you any wire instructions. The only one that's ever going to ask you for wire any funds is the title company. Most title companies now also have some security measures where maybe they leave off the last couple digits and say you have to call us to get those last 4 digits, so that you have to call them and make sure it's really their wire instructions. But if these scammers are smart and they get into our emails and they see that this person's my client, and now they have my client's name and property that they're purchasing and all their information, and they can just send an email posing as us and saying, hey, wire $10,000 to this bank. And once that money's gone, it's gone. So, so I'm always sure to stop and really explain that paragraph about electronic data security to my clients, because I don't want them to, I want them to know that if they get wire instructions from me, don't do it, call me, it's not from me. Okay, so then the next line, 56, we're gonna get into financing. So they have how many days to make loan application? I usually write in 5 days in this line. Some agents write 3 days, some write 5. I've seen some offers come in with 10 days. I wouldn't want them to have more than 10 days, probably. But 5 seems to be a good number to get a loan, formal loan application. Buyers will get confused. They're going to say, oh, I already made loan application. No, you didn't. You got a pre-approval letter. They pulled your credit. They looked at your tax returns. They looked at your income and debt and everything, but that's not the same as a formal loan application. So make sure that they understand that, because they will get confused on that. And then the finance contingency is on line 57. So your clients are likely going to have a contingency if something happens and they can't secure their financing. What I like to do as a buyer's agent, this date, I try to line that up with our closing date. So that gives them the finance contingency right up until we close. If the listing agent is paying attention, they might fight you on that. We're doing a 45-day close. We're not going to give you 45 days for, or even 30 days close. We're not going to give you 30 days for a finance contingency. So I always try to line it up with our closing date just to protect my buyer. But I also tell my buyers when we're writing this up that if the listing agent's got a problem with it, I think 21 days is an acceptable timeline to get your finance secured. So at that point, if something happens after that period that you don't get financing, you could potentially lose your earnest money, but you've got 21 days to work with your lender to get them all the documents that they need to get conditional approval from that lender. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. And if they don't get that written loan commitment in that time frame, and you're going to, if your buyer does not get that written loan commitment, what you should be doing is either asking for an extension at that point or asking for a mutual release. Ignoring it does not mean it goes away. So if you need more time, ask for more time. If they're not getting their loan, get a mutual release, earnest money returned to the buyer, because you can't remove your finance contingency. Closing. So first line, we're going to pick our title company who's going to hold all the escrow funds. Ohio Real Title, we're going to write in there whoever we're going to use as the escrow agent, and closing will be on, or I'm sorry, the funds will be deposited on or before. I usually put our closing date. So the funds are due on the closing date. That's how I usually do it. I know some agents will do funds are due 1 or 2 days early. We don't, the reason I do the same day as our closing date is because we don't always know, we haven't gotten that settlement statement balance between the lender and the title company till the very last minute. So that's why I like to make that the same day. And then
That too, because sometimes like we have some of our agents will do the day or so before the funding and then the closing date, the last one. And sometimes not Ohio Real, the other title agencies, or I've seen other lenders take that first week and use it as the close date, and you get all the way up to it and they're like, oh, we're closing today. And
no, we're not. Yeah, so I like to just make the, I mean, my personal practice is is to just make the funds date the same as our closing date, because we know that the lenders are gonna take it up to the last second, and then they're gonna send their docs over to the title company, and they're gonna have to balance their settlement statement with the lender settlement statement. There might be some back and forth until it all balances out. And we don't know a day before or 3 days before how much the buyer has to deposit. And the lenders also, by the way, that's all funds, that's lenders funds too. Lenders aren't sending money 3 days ahead of time, typically. So I like to, and nobody's ever called me. I know that there's agents that like to write different dates on there, and that's fine if that's what you guys choose to do in your business. I've never been called out on that representing a buyer where a listing agent said, no, you need to deposit funds a day or two before. That's, I've had them call me out on that finance contingency, the loan commitment going right up until the last second. But I've never had them call me out on, putting funds due the same day as closing. And then walkthrough.
Well, wait,
Yep.
65, title shall transfer from seller to buyer on or about like the next day after closing.
No, so that's the same thing. So title transfer, closing, that's two ways of saying the same thing.
So the same date.
Yeah, so the first on line 665, the first date would be the funds are due on January 31st, and title shall transfer from seller to the buyer on or about January 31st. Make sure that when you're picking that date, look at the calendar and make sure it's not a Saturday or Sunday or a holiday. And then, of course, on or about. So what that word about means to me is, I have a closing today that was supposed to close on Friday the 6th. The lender took a couple extra days and we didn't get it done till today. So we didn't need an extension. We didn't need an addendum because of that word about. So what a court might say the word about means, how many days is still about, I don't know, but I don't think anybody's going to argue that, 2 business days late. We were supposed to close Friday, we're closing Tuesday. I don't think anybody's going to argue that 2 business days is about January 6th. So, all right. And then the walkthrough. I usually fill in that blank as 0 to 3 days before closing. And the reason I put 0 to 3 days, I know a lot of agents will put 3 days. Sometimes the sellers aren't out 3 days before. Sometimes they're not out till a day before closing. And it's important that you do your walkthrough, unless there's some sort of rent back or tenant occupied property. It's really important that when you do your final walkthrough, you see the house that you're getting. So you want to see that they left it broom clean, that they didn't leave trash all over the place or their furniture still there. You want to see that when they removed that big TV off the wall, that there wasn't, some damage behind there, that when they moved the couch out, that the movers didn't punch a hole through a wall accidentally, or maybe not accidentally, but there was no damage to the house, that it's in the same condition that it was at the time of your home inspection, plus any repairs that they were supposed to make due to the home inspections, which we're going to get to soon, and less normal wear and tear. So normal wear and tear to me means that they took down their family photos and there's little nail holes there. That's normal wear and tear. They, like we were saying before, they removed that TV mount and they had these giant bolts holding up that heavy TV, and now you've got big holes in the wall. That's a different story. Or the movers, the bed hit the corner and took out a chunk of the wall. That's not normal wear and tear. So the reason I do 0 to 3 days is just because, 3 days would obviously be ideal to give you more time if there is a problem, that you have that 3 days to figure out how we're resolving that. But it's not always realistic because sellers sometimes can't move until the very last second. So, so that's why I do it that way. Questions before I move on the walkthrough? So possession, seller gets possession on or before 6 p.m. You know, assuming that we're not doing any sort of rent back, that we close and your buyer gets possession, I'm going to put 0 days after the recording of the deed. Or I'm going to put, you can pick the date, January 31st, like the example we were using, or what I usually do is time of title transfer. I just type in there time of title transfer. So basically once it's closed, your buyer gets the keys. If you're doing any sort of rent back, then that's a whole different story. And we should probably have a conversation when you're writing that offer, because those can get very tricky. But in an ideal world where giving the buyer possession at the time of title transfer, and that's how I would write that. And it's important that your buyers know to change over utilities, especially in Cleveland and in the winter time, that the seller is responsible for those utilities up until that day of title transfer, but your buyers are responsible for it after that. They need to know that ahead of time, especially with gas and electric, because if that seller turns off, we're closing today, and the seller says transfer it out of my name as of tomorrow, and your buyer hasn't called to turn it back on, that gas is going to get shut off tomorrow, and it's going to be cold, and the house is going to freeze, and then we're going to have all sorts of other problems. So let's make sure that our clients know ahead of time to call gas and electric. Water is a little different. Water, so most of the houses I think we're selling are on either City of Cleveland or well water if we get into Geauga County. City of Akron maybe has their own water department, but either way, most water departments will not transfer that water ahead of time. The nice thing about the water meters is that they're all remote access. So your water meter's reading every hour, basically sending a meter reading to the water department. City of Cleveland knows, you know, I've gotten letters before saying, hey, we suspect you have a leak because your usage is too high, because they're reading it every hour and they see that my usage is not typical usage anymore. So they will not transfer, they won't take your call ahead of time. They'll take your call, they'll put you on hold for an hour and a half and then tell you that you need to call back after title transfer. With water, I just tell my clients, wait a couple days. When you see that property's transferred on the recorder's website, on the auditor's website, then you can call the water department and have that transferred over to your name. And the nice thing is that if you're a couple days late or a week late, they can go back and read it. So they can say, okay, well, we closed a week ago, the meter reading was this. They can go back and adjust that billing so that so the seller isn't paying for somebody else's water usage. So that's with possession, making sure that they know to transfer those utilities over. Title. So this paragraph basically says you're going to get the property with a clear title. And it's the title company's job to make sure that you get a clear title. If there's no liens, the seller doesn't have a plumber that posted a mechanic's lien on the property or back taxes, or if there is, either you knew about that and you're assuming those, or most likely if there is, then this title company is going to be responsible for making sure that those get cleared off. So they'll take the seller's proceeds and make sure that those taxes are paid up to current. Unless there's any other circumstance that you've negotiated into your purchase agreement, which is fairly uncommon. But if you say we're going to buy it for this and we're going to assume those back taxes and we're lowering our offer because of that, then obviously that's something that you knew about, a defect that you knew about on title. But otherwise, you're going to get a clear title. Title company is responsible for making sure that that's all clear. And you have that title insurance policy to make sure that nothing was missed. Prorations. So this paragraph talks about prorations due. Most of this is tenant related or condominium HOA related. So if you're buying a tenant occupied property and there's a security deposit, here it says that you're going to credit that security deposit to the buyer. The seller is going to credit that security deposit to the buyer. Now, when that tenant moves out, the buyer is responsible for returning that security deposit. So that needs to be taken care of as a proration at closing. If there's rents paid and we're in the middle of the month, so we're closing on the 15th, the tenant already paid on the 1st of the month for this month, then the title company is going to give you a proration for that rent. Same thing with condominium association dues, HOA dues, any payments. Sometimes it goes the other way around. Sometimes it's we haven't paid it, so we're going to give, the credit can go either way. If it's been paid or not been paid, it can go either way. You just want to make sure that that's all accounted for appropriately. Does that make sense? And then the other thing that's in the proration section, I usually write in $200, and I've seen agents write in $300 here on line 90. Is that 98? Yeah, 98. So what that is, remember we talked about how the water, we can't usually change that over. Now, by the way, Danny, I know you're going to be working in some properties that are on well water, so you can write 0. So if we're working on a property that has no water bill, you can always write nothing in there or write $0 in there or NA. But if you're working on something with city water where you have a water bill, I usually write in $200. And what that's for is because if that seller doesn't pay their final electric bill or gas bill, not your buyer's problem, right? The Dominion will send a collection agency after that seller, and you're going to the buyer's going to turn on the gas into their name and start fresh with a new bill. But the water goes with the property. So if they decide not to pay their final water bill, of course, because we can't transfer that ahead of closing, we find out after the fact. So the reason we're holding that $200 is to make sure that the seller pays their final bill. That $200 is held by the title company, the escrow agent. And then what I tell my sellers don't pay that final water bill. That final water and sewer bill maybe going to be $50, $100. Usually it's going to be less than $200. Don't pay it, take that final bill, send it to the title company, let the title company pay it out of your $200 they're holding, and they'll refund you the balance. If they're going to pay it, then it gets complicated at least with City of Cleveland. I don't know how the other city waters are, but Cleveland trying to get a piece of paper that says your final bill was paid in full and that you have a 0 balance is not an easy task with Cleveland Water. So, but that's what the title company would need. If they do pay that final water bill, you need something saying that your final bill was paid in full and there's a 0 balance. You send that to title and they'll get the full 200 back. It's just easier to let them pay the final water and sewer bills. Questions? Oh, the other thing that's a big one in prorations is taxes. We know we pay taxes a year behind in the state of Ohio, right? So January next week, our tax bills are due, and that's for the first half of 2022. So, so if we're closing end of January using that same date, that January tax bill should be paid, which means that your seller has paid taxes through June 30th of 2022. July 1 through January 31st of 23 is not paid, but the seller owned the house then. But the county doesn't care. In July, when that next tax bill comes out, it's going to whoever owns the property today. So we're going to do a proration. So we're going to give a credit for that 7 months of taxes that the seller is going to owe. So when the buyer gets that tax bill, they can pay that. Make sense? Okay, charges through escrow. So when I'm representing a buyer, I just skip this whole paragraph here. It says what the seller closing costs are, because we're talking about writing purchase agreements. So in theory, we're talking about representing buyers. So I'll skip down to 113, which says the buyer shall pay the following through escrow. They're going to pay half the escrow fee, which depending on the title company that we're using, depending on the county that we're in, I think I've seen them as low as $275. I think I've seen them as high as $400, but usually $275 to $350 seems like the right number. Half of the cost of insuring premium of the title insurance policy. And when I go over this, I usually have to open up Google and start searching what so the title insurance, I explain to my buyers, it's an insurance policy that we pay one time when you buy the house. It's a buyer's fee, but it's customary in our area that you pay half when you buy and half when you sell. So here it's saying half of it because the other half is getting charged to the seller. In Ohio, it's the cost of that insurance is mandated by the state of Ohio. So it doesn't matter if you're using Ohio Real Title or Infinity Title or American Title Solutions, whoever you're using, it's all going to be the same. That fee is going to be the same. It's a tiered premium coverage. So depending on the purchase price, I always remember the first $150,000 is $5.75 per thousand. After that, it drops down and then it drops down again. And there's several tiers and I usually have to look it up. That $5.75 per thousand is the full policy, the full premium. So half of that would be your clients. So if you're selling a house over 150, I always have to Google it. I don't know why I can never remember the rest of those tiers, but that's how that works. All recording fees for the deed and any mortgages, those are the responsibility of your buyer. And then there's an additional commission to Keller Williams of $295. The only time we waive that $295 is if it's a VA buyer. VA does not allow that fee on there, so we won't collect it. FHA won't allow it, so we won't collect it. If you're doing a bank-owned property, they won't pay it, and so we won't collect it. If you've got a client that's bought several houses from you and you just say, you know what, you don't have to pay it, that's fine. That's your business decision. Just know that we're going to collect that out of Keller Williams Living will collect it. So I have buyers who've bought several houses from me. They're investors. They've spent, a lot of money, and I've earned a lot of commissions from them. And they fight me about that $295, and I waive it for them. But when I get paid on their deals, the office is taking that out of. It's not waived by the office. Does that make sense?
So it's coming out of your.
Right. So if my commission is $10,000, I'm getting 10,000 less $295. If you're representing the buyer, your buyer can still pay it. If you're, I guess, yeah, I mean, we're talking about buyers today, so maybe I shouldn't have even mentioned bank owns, but yeah, if you're listing a bank owned property, they typically won't. Short sales won't allow it, even if you're a buyer's agent. I would suggest trying to collect it on a short sale if you're representing a buyer, but when the short sale bank sees that, they might say no to it. And if that's the case, then we would waive it. If it's like an institution that won't allow the fee to be paid. But if you're just waiving it because it's your mom buying the house and you don't want to charge your mom the $295, that's totally fine. It's your business. You can do what you want. Just understand that the office isn't waiving it unless it's institutional.
So if your buyer is getting an FHA loan,
Mhm.
they will not pay that.
Correct.
And
And
like,
we
how
will
do
waive
you
that.
Write that. How does,
You can just, when you're writing the contract, you can just do a strike through. In dot loop, you can add strike through. What I would do if you're waiving it, for whatever reason you're waiving it, I would just do that.
and then like right after that, FHA loan or something?
You don't even have to do that, but what I would suggest that you do if it is FHA or VA, Ricky wouldn't necessarily know when he's writing your commission checks, when he's paying you for your deals, he wouldn't necessarily know that it's an FHA deal and that's why it's waived. So if it is one of those examples where we should not be collecting it, I would put a note in there in command in your commission that this is an FHA. So the additional commission is waived. Yeah. Line 118, home warranties. So if you're representing a buyer, what I do is I'll go into the MLS first and see if they're offering a home warranty. If they're offering the home warranty, I'm going to check buyer elects to have a home warranty from, call the listing agent, say, where's the home warranty from? And tell you it's America's Preferred Home Warranty. You put in there, you can ask them how much is the premium. You can put that in that next line on 119. If you don't know and you're hurrying up because there's multiple offers and you're up against a deadline, just write so the buyer elects to have a home warranty from seller's choice at a cost of per contract, and then check paid by seller. Now, if they're not offering it, what I would do is when I represent a buyer, if my buyer wants it, we can write it in there. It's a negotiable line item just because the seller's not offering it. It's negotiable. So we can ask the seller to pay for it, or if they don't, America's Preferred that we're using in our office is $499. So you put in elects to have it from America's Preferred, cost of $499, paid by seller, and let the seller say, no, we're not paying that. And then you can have that conversation with your buyer. Do you want it? You can buy it at closing, or you as the agent can buy it as a closing gift for your client if you choose to.
How would you guys market that?
I would probably, if you're paying for it, yeah, I would put in
And then just credit them that closing or something?
yeah, you could do that, or just don't check seller or buyer, and maybe just add a text box over here saying home
Oh.
warranty is paid by buyer's agent. Okay. And then we get to the inspections, and this part gets everybody excited because we've talked already a bunch of times up until now about you're buying the home as is, and buyers don't like to hear that they're buying it as is because they say, oh, we're getting an inspection. Well, now we're getting to that part of the contract where they get to understand what the inspections are. So here again, it talks about doing your due diligence and you're buying the home as is, but you get to know what is as is. And if you choose to have inspections, here's your list of inspections that you can choose. So typically I'll choose a general home inspection. I typically write 7 days, although check the calendar. If you're coming up on Christmas or New Year's, you might want to make that 10 days just to make sure that a home inspector is available. Septic inspection, if you're selling a property that's mostly going to be out in like Geauga County. In our area, it's going to be mostly Geauga County. If you're in some neighborhoods in Pepper Pike or Moreland Hills, Hunting Valley might have it. So even in Cuyahoga County, you might still find septics. But for the most part, what I'm selling, I don't know about you guys, Danny, maybe you're going to run into it more than the rest of us, but I think most of us are going to say no septic. Water potability and well flow rate. If you're on city water, you can check no. If you're on well water, then you want to check yes. Radon, I always recommend my clients check for radon. Radon's quite common in Northeast Ohio. It's hit and miss. Your neighbor might have it and you might not. Radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States, next to smoking. So it's important that they understand that risk, and if they choose not to have it, then that's on them, but we're going to explain to them the importance of it. And then other, so radon, I'm going to put 10 days for radon because the radon test, the little computer that they set up has to sit there for 48 hours to test the air samples. So if your home inspector sets it up on day 7, if your general home inspection is done in 7 days and you don't get it set up until the 7th day, then they've got that extra couple days to get the radon report from there. And then other inspections, what I'm going to write is 10 days, and any other inspection. Okay, and then so they've got 10 days total for anything else that's recommended by the general home inspector. General home inspector sees a crack in the basement wall and they're not a structural engineer, so they're gonna say, this looks suspicious. You've got an extra couple days to get an engineer out there then at that point to review it. I had an inspector look at an electrical panel and tell me, I've never seen a house wired this way. It seems to me like it might be appropriate, but I've never seen it done this way, and I'm not an electrician, so we had a couple extra days to call an electrician. The electrician verified it's not very common, but it is an appropriate way to wire it. So we had an extra couple days to verify that. So that's what that, and then these are all paid by the buyer typically. I've never seen it any other way. I wish Kathleen was still here to talk to tell us more about septic and wells, because I'm just not very well versed in those. But with septics, I think your septic and well inspections, you're going to need more time than the 7 or 10 days. So if you get into a property like that, I would say call me and we'll find the answer together. But I don't think the 7 and 10 days is going to be sufficient for septic or well.
Can the health department help you with that?
Maybe depending on the county, but some like Cuyahoga County does not do septics anymore.
Are they done?
No, so if you have a septic in Cuyahoga County, you're going to be calling a private septic inspector. Geauga changed it recently. I'm not sure how often they do it, and I'm not sure that the Department of Health is even still doing it. They may be doing it in Geauga, or they may have followed Cuyahoga's lead and said you need to get a private company to do the inspection. I'm not certain how exactly they're doing it. So
On the other website, they had like a list of approved vendors or inspectors that they have used, things like that. I don't know necessarily that you have to use those, but they do have like a long list on there.
Mhm. Yeah, so if you get a property with septic or well and you're not sure what to do, call me and we'll figure it out together. I'm over time, so I'm going to start flying through this. You're going to have line 157. Your buyer's going to initial this, and that's saying that they're waiving the right to any other inspection except the ones that are checked yes. But remember, if you fill it out the same way I've done it with other inspections, it's the door's wide open, right? After the inspections, within 3 days of the last inspection, and this confuses some people, that's 3 days of completion of the inspection, not 3 days from receiving your report. So if your inspector is not getting you the report promptly, you better find a new inspector. Most inspectors are getting those reports out to you by the next day, but if you've got somebody that's taking their time, it might be time for a new inspector. One of 3 things is going to happen after within 3 days of your inspection. Your buyer's either going to accept the property as is. No big surprises. Everything was great. We're going to move forward just like we agreed. Option 2 is that you're going to accept the property subject to specific repairs of conditions or defects identified in the written report by the professional inspector or contractor. So notice that this says specific repairs. It does not say credits. It says that repairs. Now, as you negotiate it, it might be that you end up taking a credit for it, and that's fine, but you don't have the right to ask for credits if that seller's agent wants to be picky. It does say repairs. So we found mold in the attic. We want you to remove it, clean that mold. Is it mitigate or remediate mold? We want you to remediate the mold in the attic. seller says, no, I don't want to clean it, you can, then at that point, we're negotiating, okay, give me $500 credit or $1,000 credit, if that's what you guys want to do. But so if you found some defects, you can start negotiating that way. By the way, I think it's best practice not to take a price reduction unless you got a cash buyer. Don't take a price reduction on repairs. If you're negotiating dollars for this at that point, I would go with a closing cost credit. Check with your lender to make sure you're not maxed out on your closing cost credit. But if you're not maxed out on closing cost credit, that's going to be better because, you know, $1,000 credit for mold is going to save your buyer what, $6 a month. And now they have to pay a $1,000 bill and they're saving $6 a month versus the closing cost credit. They actually have that money in their pocket because that's $1,000 less that they brought to the closing table. So that's why I like to do closing cost credit. But at the end of the day, it's up to your client. So, and then the last option is that you can terminate the agreement with if the written report identifies any material latent defects not previously disclosed in writing by the seller and or any broker or agent. So we found mold in the attic. I don't want to ask you to clean it. I just don't want to buy this house. I mean, I think mold is a pretty silly example of something to blow up a deal over, but because mold can be typically, unless there's a larger underlying issue, but mold in the attic is quite common, or a basement is common, and it's usually not a huge expense unless the mold is there because the roof is leaking and now you got to repair a roof before you can clean the mold. Then we're talking about something different. But if it's a material defect that was not disclosed, now if they told you in that property disclosure that there's mold in the attic, then you knew about that going in, your buyer knew about that going into it, and that's not a negotiable item. But if they didn't disclose that and you discovered it during inspections, then it's a material defect, you can terminate this agreement and buyer would get their earnest money back. Pest and wood destroying insects, this basically says that, so if you want to have a separate pest inspection, you can have that. It also says that if there is any repairs needed, who's going to repair, who's going to pay for those damages or the repair expense. It also says that if the cost exceeds $500, whoever's responsible for it may terminate this agreement. So if we said seller is going to repair any damages from a pet that we find in a pest inspection, and they go to get that repaired and it's $600, they have the right to say, nope, we're not doing it, we're not closing. And they can terminate this agreement. Lead-based paint inspection, it's up to your client whether they do one or not, but I will tell you, in 15 years in this business, I've never had anybody do a lead inspection. I know that's kind of a hot topic now. I know some of the cities are changing their rules about lead, so maybe that's going to start changing, but for now, at least, most people understand that if your house is built prior to 1978, there's a good chance there's lead in the house. City of Cleveland already changed some of their rules about lead. They have that lead safe program. Cleveland Heights, don't know if it was approved, but it was definitely in front of council recently in Cleveland Heights. I suspect that a lot of the cities are going to start following suit, and we might start seeing something change with lead. But for now, it's up to them if they want to do that inspection. But most people understand that there's a good chance it's there if your house was built prior to 78. Make sure you give them a copy of the lead, protect your family from lead in the home pamphlet from the EPA. And there's that lead disclosure if the house was built prior to 78. Here's where that lead disclosure should be. So hopefully the listing agent has uploaded that disclosure into the MLS and you have a copy of it, so you can check here, have your buyer's initial here that they've received it. But if they haven't, if that agent hasn't put it up there, you don't have a copy of it yet, you can check that box that you have not received it, or that the buyer has not received it, have your buyer's initial here. And then I'll usually put like 3 days. So once that seller gives it to us, we have 3 days to sign it. Megan's Law, that just says if the seller has any knowledge of a sex offender living in the area, that they have to disclose it to you. Not every sex offender gets a written postcard sent out to the neighborhood. So if this is something that's important to your buyers, I would tell them that they can also check the sheriff's website. Most counties, if not all counties, you can search, and it tells you every tier of sex offender that lives in the area, not just the ones that are getting the postcards sent out to the neighbors. Again, more about as is condition and property disclosures. So hopefully, again, like the lead paint disclosure, hopefully the sellers have filled out the residential property disclosure form, and you can say that you've received it because it's in the MLS, but if you haven't, you'll check it here. If you have received it, anything that's in there, remember, it's not negotiable when you do your home inspection, unless it turns out something different. You know, that it's possible the seller said, we had a roof leak, it was repaired, and then you do your home inspection and you find out, no, it's still actively leaking. Now it's negotiable, or or it wasn't repaired properly. You know, if something like that is discovered, that's different than knowing that there's a roof leak and then having your inspector verify it, and then you say, I want money off because of the roof leak. Does that make sense? If they haven't sent you the disclosures yet and you're writing an offer without the disclosures, I would put probably 5 days in here, because you want to make sure that once you get that disclosure, that your client has enough time to review it, understand it, and decide to move forward. If there's something in there, if they're disclosing a defect to you that your buyer's not comfortable with, they do have the option to terminate. Now, this is it's a new disclosure, basically something new that happened since you've negotiated this deal. Seller's gonna deliver the property in broom clean condition, free and clear of all debris and chattel. Again, just free and clear of personal property unless it's been negotiated in there. If there's any gas leaks, then I think that's what, I'm sorry, no, I take that back. If there's any violations that come up, health, safety, city violations that might come up between the time you've negotiated this contract and before closing, the seller has to notify you guys, hey, the city just came by and cited us for the cracked sidewalk. Now we have, I'll put in here 5 days. We have 5 days to negotiate who's going to be responsible for that. I would say normally at that point, if you didn't have, unless it's something that you knew about also from your home inspection, then if it's a new problem, the seller's going to take care of it 9 times out of 10, unless it's a sidewalk block now and it's too cold outside to pour concrete, then maybe you just take a credit for it. But unless it's something you knew about either from a disclosure already or from your home inspection already, I think it's negotiable, but I would say that most likely it's going to be the seller. You have 5 days to agree in writing of who's going to be responsible for it. Representations or disclaimers, basically just acknowledging that the seller had filled out or is responsible for completing the Ohio residential property disclosure form and disclosing any material defects. That there's no, if there's any special assessments or anything on the property, that those are all disclosed to you guys. Damages, if there's damage to the property in excess of 10% of the purchase price. This has happened to me once before. It's not fun. I had a house in Shaker Heights, $650,000 house that froze 2 weeks before closing. The pipes froze. The house was already vacant. Nobody was there to shut off the water. The neighbor actually called us and said, hey, I hear water running in the house. And we rushed over there and got it shut off. But by that point, the basement was flooded. The kitchen floors, the hardwood floors were all buckled. The ceiling had fallen down in the basement. It was a lot of damage. So at that point, we looked at this clause and it was more than 10% of the purchase price. So what we decided, we negotiated, was we were going to delay closing until the seller took care of it. The seller was getting insurance to take care of it. took some time to get a contractor out there to fix everything, but it was in excess of 10%. So what my buyer could have done is they could have said, thanks, but no thanks, we're not buying your house. Because there's new damage to the property in excess of 10%. They also had the option, they could have said, we'll buy it as is, and you're going to give us that insurance proceeds check and we'll take care of it. But who wants to deal with that hassle? Not many people, I don't think, would want to deal with that. If it's less than 10%, the seller's obligated to return the property to the previous condition. So had that flooding not caused as extensive of a damage, then we wouldn't have had a choice. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to terminate this contract. We would have had to allow the seller to restore the property to how it was beforehand. Okay. Check off any addendums that are included. By the way, this also means if you don't have that residential property disclosure form yet, if they had, you're waiting on the seller to fill it out, it's still going to be part of this contract. So we're still going to check that, even though you haven't seen it yet, you haven't signed off on it yet. Once it arrives, it's part of the contract. So we're going to check off the agency disclosure, the residential property. If there's FHA, VA, condo, you'll check off what's appropriate. Lead-based paint if it's built prior to 78. Any other addendums, if we're using Ohio Real Title, we're going to put in here the affiliated business arrangement disclosure notice. If you're using that COVID addendum, you're going to include that here. Anything else that you're, if you've written addendum A or something,
You said, even if you received them or not.
yeah. So I'm talking about like the disclosure forms. If the seller has not provided you the disclosure form and you're writing this offer, but one's required, if it's not one of the exemptions from the state of Ohio, so a disclosure form's required, but you haven't yet received it, I would check it off because it's still, it basically tells everybody that we need it. We've already said in the previous page that we didn't receive it, but here we're saying it needs to be received, and once it is received and acknowledged, it's part of this contract. Once we sign it, it's a binding agreement. Buyers will sign. I'm going to leave this blank because we're not touching earnest money here. So I'm not going to fill in this earnest money section unless there's some sort of special circumstance and you got to get permission from me before you take earnest money. And I can tell you there's not many situations where I'm going to say, okay, we'll accept that earnest money. And then the seller will sign down here. Just make sure you fill in all of our names and license numbers. Our Keller Williams Living brokerage license number is already filled in here. It's pre-populated for you. So you just need to really get the listing agent, the listing brokerage, fill in their license numbers. If you can't find it, then skip it and let them fill it in. But it's pretty important to have all this filled in here too. Here's our affiliated business arrangement disclosure notice. This just says that Keller Williams Living has a business relationship with Ventureland Title, which is Ohio Real Title. So if we're using Ohio Real, by the way, Title Professionals is also part of Ventureland. So I think there's a few agents in our office that have their own relationship with Title Professionals, or if whoever the listing agent says we want to use Title Professionals, understand that we need this ABA there too, because those two companies are both part of Ventureland. For your protection, get a home inspection. So this is the form I told you at the very beginning. This is an FHA form, but I like this because it says why it's important to have a home inspection, what is radon gas, it gives you some information about that. And then it also says, I've chosen to perform a home inspection. I've chosen not to. So hopefully your clients are choosing to perform the home inspection. Like that. And then if you're giving them any names for a home inspector, you have to give at least 3 names. cannot give them one name, your favorite. You can't give them your favorite two. If you're giving them, you don't have to give them any. I would recommend giving them, but you don't have to give them any names. But if you give them any names, you have to give at least 3 names. What I've done, by the way, when I have my own form, and I've just, on a Word document that saved it as a PDF, and I've uploaded into my .loop. So the next page in my contracts will be a list of, here's my 3 inspectors and names and license numbers, Ohio inspector license numbers, and their phone number. So when they're signing this and it says I've received at least 3 qualified inspectors, the very next page is the list of 3 qualified inspectors. This is not something we're going to submit with the this is the removal of contingency. So this is going to come later after you've done your home inspection. We're negotiating the removal of contingencies. So you would check off which inspection you're removing or removing subject to condition. Okay, so let's say we found some mold and we found some radon. So we're going to say general home inspection is removed subject to condition. Oh, no, we have mold separately here. So we're going to say general. I would put it this way. If we found mold and radon, what I would do is I would check like that. Others, I would say all other inspections. And then if we scroll down under conditions, I would write 1, seller to remediate mold in attic. 2, seller to mitigate radon by a so they're getting rid of the radon by a qualified company. I would probably say the same thing for the mold. Don't just send some uncle up there in the attic with a bottle of bleach. Get it done by a qualified company. And the home warranty. So home warranty is a required document, whether you're getting a home warranty for your client, whether your client's taking a home warranty or not, it's required. If the seller is providing something other than America's Preferred Home Warranty, you still need this America's Preferred Home Warranty document signed. Fill it out. And at the bottom, have them sign that they're accepting it, or if they're not accepting it because they're either not taking a home warranty or because the listing agent is providing a HSA warranty instead, then have them sign the waiver at the bottom. This is required. You will not get paid if you don't have this form in your documents. The reason being is that if there's ever a claim about the transaction, America's Preferred Home Warranty will help us with our legal expenses, defending you and the brokerage on that transaction, as long as this was put in front of them. So that means even if they didn't take the America's Preferred warranty, as long as we can show America's Preferred that we gave this option to our client, then they're going to help us. I think it's $10,000. Don't quote me on that dollar amount, but they're going to help us with that defense. So that's why this form is required. Even if they're getting a different warranty, have them sign the waiver on this one. Even if they're not taking any warranty, have them sign the waiver. Okay, and that's it. That's our contracts. What questions do you guys have?
I think most of the questions, like for me at least, will come when I am writing a contract.
And that's normal.
I don't think I have questions right now.
Okay, yeah, I think that's normal. The first couple times you write it, you're gonna think of things that you don't know, or your clients are gonna ask you questions that you're unsure of, and just ask.
Yeah.
Even investors have to sign when they come to the house.
Yep. Yep, and even if it's a multifamily house that doesn't qualify for America's Preferred, You know, if it's a rental property, I'm not mistaken, I don't think they cover multifamilies, but not if it's exclusively, I believe that it has to be a owner occupied house to qualify for a home warranty. So if they're not taking it because it's an investor, still, because they'll still help us with, you know, hopefully we don't have any legal claims, but if we do, then we need them to chip in.
What about, I have a client right now that's wanting to find a place to rent. Do I have them fill out this loan fair contract too? even
No.
though they're not buying
No,
it?
you're talking about you're representing a tenant?
Yeah,
No, we have a whole different thing for
Oh.
tenants. Yeah. Yeah, we should talk separately. If
Okay.
ask Kathleen for help with that, or you can ask me and we can, but it's totally different than this. Yeah. That's it.
If
Yeah.
they,
Mhm.
if the buyer wants to put this in a trust,
Mhm.
so when you put this in a purchase agreement, you list the trust
Mhm.
as the buyer.
Yep. And then you're gonna need to see some documentation from that trust to make sure that the person signing is a trustee. Because there's lots of ways that trust can be set up. So it might be, I might have a trust, the Rick Tannenbaum trust with Danny as the trustee, even though Danny's not, you know, a beneficiary of that trust. People do that. So just need to make sure, just because it's the Rick Tannenbaum trust doesn't mean that Rick Tannenbaum's able to sign for that trust. So you need to see something showing who the trustee is. Sometimes there's co-trustees, which means that just because I'm a trustee, if my wife is also a trustee, if we're co-trustees, we both have to sign. I can't do it without her and she can't do it without me. We both have to sign. So if you're doing it in a trust and in the state, well, you wouldn't buy in the state, but if you're working an LLC, if a company's buying a property, you want to just make sure that whoever's signing that purchase agreement is authorized to sign and able to sign.
And I would get that information from the auditor.
Now, from your client, say you need your copy of the trust documents. They're going to need it for the title company anyways.
Oh.
So they're going to have to produce that for title. And I would just ask them to produce it for you so that you can go through and make sure that, I mean, the title company is going to be looking at other stuff in there. But I think for your purpose as a buyer's agent, if it's in the name of a trust or an LLC, you just want to make sure that it says that Rick Tannenbaum is the trustee, that Rick Tannenbaum is the authorized agent for ABC company, you know. You just want to verify, because if you get somebody else's signature on it, then that contract doesn't, yeah, if I'm not authorized to sign for the trust, then you don't have a contract. So. Make sense? All right.